We're in Esther, the 6th chapter, and we're going to be picking up there in a moment. But we want to back up because it's important to notice, going into this chapter, the events and kind of make sure we've got a time scale here. We remember in chapter 5, this is when Esther had prayed with her ladies in her that took care of her, and the Jews in Shushan were praying and for her to have success in going before the king. And so she went before the king. She stood in the hall as soon as she entered, and the king extended the golden scepter to her. And something that's almost always overlooked, I think, by many, is the fact that when he extended the golden scepter, God put a little detail in there that we can overlook very easily. She went up and touched the top of the golden scepter. Why would God put such a small little detail if it wasn't important? And I believe it's because all through the scripture we learn a very important lesson. God can offer us salvation, which is what the king was offering to her, because she would have been put to death under their law. God can offer us salvation, but if we refuse to accept the mercy and grace that he shows to us, we don't receive that mercy and grace. That is eternal salvation. And so even in the book of Daniel, or in the book of Esther, we're seeing this law, so to speak, that is in God's repertoire, so to speak. And she then offers to have Haman and the king come to have a banquet with her. Now this is interesting because what we're seeing is in chapter 5 and chapter 6 is basically 2 days worth of material. That's all that's there, 2 days. And so Haman, we remember, was all happy and joyous and, oh, hot dog, I'm the favorite. I'm getting invited to this dinner with the king and the queen. I'm the only guest. And he's all happy about that. And so he goes home, but on the way, Mordecai's there. And Mordecai won't bow to him. In fact, won't even get up out of his way to allow him to walk through. He obviously made Haman walk around him. And so that's where we are. He gets home, and his family, his advisors, his close friends tell him, why don't you build a gallows? And we remember we studied the idea of a Persian gallows is not as we think of it from the Old West. It was a crucifixion, or most generally, when they did an execution, it was to take a stake and pull the person down on the stake so it came out their neck. And it was a very excruciating death. It wasn't quick. It was meant to be long. And that's where we get to in chapter 6. Now let's begin by looking at verses 1 through 3. On that night, this is the very night that Haman had gone home, upset because Mordecai had not bowed down to him, given the exhortation to build a gallows for him and go to the king the next day and ask for his life. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity hath been done to Mordecai for this? And then said the king's servants that ministered unto him, there is nothing done for him. Keep in mind the time frame. This is bang, bang, bang time frame. That night, the very night that Haman's friends told him to build a gallows, go ahead and get Mordecai and get him out of the way. That way, you won't have to put up with seeing him anymore. You won't have to put up with being disgusted at him. Watch the providence of God here. Even though it's not mentioned, we know by hindsight that God's hand was involved in this. Apparently, Haman intended on killing Mordecai the very next day that the king has asked for this Chronicles to be read to him. Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. What do you do when you can't sleep? If you're like me, I decided a long time ago, I said, there's no sense wasting this time. I'm going to get up and I'm going to read or I'm going to study. It depends on how badly I don't feel like sleeping, whether I study or whether I read. But Ahasuerus couldn't sleep. And so he had his servants read to him from the Chronicles. And I thought about this, the Chronicles were a daily record of the things that were done by Ahasuerus. And I thought, that would probably be pretty boring. That'd probably put anybody to sleep after a little bit. The records of the daily events. And when I can't sleep, like I said, I do something about it. There's no sense wasting that time. But let's ask some questions. Was Ahasuerus sleeplessness by chance, or was it the providence of God causing him to be sleepless so that he would request the Chronicles to read? Was the choice of the Chronicles being read? Now remember, there are a lot of records. This had taken place sometime well before these events where Mordecai had warned of these men trying to kill the king. So was the choice of the Chronicles that were being read by chance, or was it the providence of God? Well, what about the scribes' choice? Was that just chance of the particular thing they read from the Chronicles? Or was it mere chance that this was the night before Haman is going to ask for Mordecai's life? How can God's providence be denied by any rational man? I believe all four of these were the providence of God. I believe God was interfering in all of these things, just like He can interfere today, even though today we don't have a record where we can go back and look and say, absolutely, this had to be the providence of God. The account read is about how Mordecai probably saved the king's life by letting the information be known of what he heard at the gate. And the king wants to know something. What honor has been given to this man who saved my life, who reported this? Remember, Ahasuerus did an investigation. He checked it out. He found that the report was true. What honor has been given to this man? What dignity has been shown to him? Under Persian law, and this was a terrible slight that he had done by not giving a reward to this man who had done something good for him. This was the habit of the Persians, and it was something that was done so strictly and so conscientiously that it was almost a law. You've got to do something for this person. If you don't, you're kind of low in the department of respect. The reply is none. Look at something that Butler wrote for us as he researched this. I forget where he. I remember now. It's right there on the screen. According to Herodotus, now remember Herodotus was a Greek historian who wrote and gave us an awful lot of information about the Persian way of life and what they did. He said, according to Herodotus, those who had done great deeds of honor and benefit to the king of Persia had their names written on a special roll or honor, and they were esteemed as a special class of people. It would be a serious violation of Persian protocol and law, and a great dishonor to the emperor should he not honor someone who had saved his life. Now, when you think about all of this terminology, you can see how important it was for an emperor to honor someone who had done something really good for him, especially saving his life. So was it mere chance that Mordecai had received no reward for this great service that he'd rendered for the king? Again, I don't think it was chance. I don't think it was just an oversight by the king. Again, I believe that it's God working in these affairs, because what if he had not given the warning to the king through Esther? Then there wouldn't be this account to read, and there wouldn't be a reason for him to honor Mordecai in such a way that it's going to cause the advisors of Haman and his wife even to say, uh-oh, you're doomed. Watch what unfolds. Verse 4 and 5. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman was come into the outward court of the king's house to speak unto the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servant said unto him, behold, Haman standeth in the court. And the king said, let him come in. The very next day, after the king couldn't sleep, after this was read to him, after he realized the oversight that he had committed with regard to Mordecai, the king said, who's in the court? The outer court. The inner court was the king's place. The outer court was where those who had business with him would come and want to, and they would have to wait for him, and maybe he'd invite them into the inner court, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he didn't want to talk any business that day. But the king said, who's in the court? Well, Haman's there. He was probably there as early as he possibly could have been. For what purpose? To ask the king for the right to go ahead and kill Mordecai. The king wanted advice. Well, that's good, isn't it? Isn't it good for rulers to ask for advice and get maybe a different perspective about things? Isn't it good for us to do that? You know, sometimes we need to stop as people, as Christians, and think before we act, and maybe get some advice from some others and see how they might have handled this or this situation or whatever it is. And that's what Ahasuerus did. And who better to give him advice than the man he relies upon as his right-hand man, the man who has all authority except above Ahasuerus in the land. So the king says, let him come in. Bring him on in. In verse 6 through 9, so Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Watch, O Haman. Now Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Look at Haman. The king said, what shall be done to somebody that I desire to honor, that I'm delighted to honor, that I respect and I'm so thankful for? It's probably evident that Ahasuerus wished to give a very, very special honor to someone, to Haman. Haman's looking at it that way. Oh, this is going to be a special honor. What can I ask for? Look at him. Observe the vanity of Haman. Observe the pride that he had. To whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Why, I'm so special. See, can you just see the arrogance of this man? And this arrogance probably was displayed very well toward the servants, the other servants of the king as well. And there'll be something we'll notice a little later about that. But he's so arrogant. Who could anybody else be more deserving of honor than me? Do you remember what Jesus taught his apostles with regard to humility? None of us should ever be arrogant. None of us should ever look at ourselves as being so great that others ought to honor us. We're nothing, especially when we compare ourselves to the one we ought to compare ourselves to, and that's God, to our Lord as he walked upon the face of the earth. Do you remember the lesson that he taught his apostles about being humble? Look at Luke 14, verses 8 through 10. When thou art bidden of any man to a wedding, sit thou not down in the highest room, lest a more honorable man than thou be bidden of him, and he that bade thee and him come and say to thee, give this man place. Let him take your place. You move to a lower place. And thou in shame take the lowest room, the lowest seat. But when thou art bidden, go and sit down in the lower room. Sit down in the lowest seat. And if that man thinks somewhat of you, what's he going to do? He's going to come and he's going to tell you, oh no, don't sit here. Go to this higher place of honor. Isn't that what Jesus told them? Look at Proverbs 29 and verse 23. A man's pride shall bring him low, but honor shall uphold the humble in spirit. In other words, honor will be given to those who are humble in spirit. Who's going to give us that honor? God. That's the only honor that you and I should ever seek. Notice the word that I emphasize, seek. Just be what God wants us to be and let the chips fall where they may. If man chooses to honor us, we need to be careful of that, don't we? It can cause us to think maybe we're better than we are, but that honor might also be false honor, might it not? Setting us up. Look at what Esther does to Haman. She sets him up for a fall. Haman seemed to have thought, what's the highest possible honor that I could get out of the king to give to this one, me, whom he wants to honor? There's no doubt that Haman thought that he was the one that was about to be honored. Look again at some passages. Ephesians 4 and verse 17. This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that ye therefore walk not as other Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind. Again, a lesson in humility, isn't it? We don't need to be looking at ourselves as being special. We're not. None of us are, except in the eyes of God, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what human beings think about us. It doesn't matter that the majority of the world look at us as Christians and say, oh, you old fuddy-duddies, you old legalist, you old whatever they want to call us. Well, the only thing that matters is, what does God think of me? Haman actually reveals is revealing what he wants to become. Let your royal apparel clothe this person. Do you see what he really wants to be? He wants to be king. Let your royal horse be ridden, the horse that nobody else is allowed to ride except the king. Let your crown royal be placed on this person's head. Isn't it evident as to what Haman really wanted? Let the noble prince, the most noble prince, the most honorable prince in the kingdom, dress this man that you desire to honor with these things. And let this man lead him through the city on horseback, through the streets of the city. And let him proclaim, see, this is what's done to the man whom the king desires to honor. And remember, all the time Haman is thinking, that's me. Oh, aren't I wonderful? Aren't I great? Aren't I powerful? Everybody ought to bow before me. Well, we already saw that, didn't we, in the way that he looked at Mordecai? Because he got so upset because Mordecai didn't bow to him, didn't give him the honor he thought he deserved. Let's look at verse 10 and 11. Then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sitteth at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Imagine Haman's shock when instead of the king saying, well, go get somebody to dress you in these things, to put my crown on your head, and to ride my horse, and to have somebody walk you through the streets of the city proclaiming, here's the one the king desires to honor. Imagine the surprise. And you know what? I have to say, Haman must have been a pretty good actor. Now, why would I say that? Because you couldn't show disappointment in front of the king under Persian law. You couldn't do that. That in itself could be a death sentence. You weren't allowed to frown in front of the king, the Persian king. And here he's getting the shock of his life. It's not you that I want to honor, Haman. And all the time Haman's thinking, it's me, it's me, it's me. He had no choice if he wanted to live but to leave the court without showing anger, dissatisfaction, and do what the king said. If he didn't, he's a dead man. Now consider the effort that would have taken for him to pretend to be joyful in doing what the king told him to do, because he's got to do it while honoring this man that he despises, who thinks is lower, as we'd say in Tennessee, lower than a snake's belly compared to him. He'd come to the court that morning, remember, for the very purpose of asking the king to allow him to murder Mordecai. And now he is tasked with giving this man he despises, who he wants to murder, the highest honor in the land. He's giving it to him. He's the one who has to show it. Now consider Mordecai. He had refused to give honor to Haman, and now Haman is honoring Mordecai. Which one's the superior? Imagine the humiliation then that Haman must have felt as he led Mordecai through the streets, dressed in all of this apparel that he wants to wear. And he leads him through the streets. The handwriting's on the wall, just like it was for Belshazzar in Daniel chapter 5. Haman couldn't read it though. Oh, it wasn't as literal as it was for Belshazzar. Belshazzar saw a hand actually writing the words, and they were there, and the people who were gathered at that feast saw them. Now, Haman can't see a hand, and Haman can't see the literal words on a wall. But the handwriting's on the wall if he just stopped to really think about it. But he doesn't. Look at Proverbs 26 and verse 27. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. Now, get the picture that's drawn here in Proverbs. If a person's going to roll a stone to hurt somebody, how's he going to roll it? Down a hill, right? Down some embankment to get the stone rolling. Isn't that right? But it says the stone will return upon him. It's going to roll uphill to crush him. In other words, God is saying it is so sure that when somebody plots and plans against somebody to do them harm, and there's no justification for it, they are going to in turn be crushed. Whoso diggeth a pit's going to fall into it. Oh, I dug that pit to trap that pit to be a snare for an animal that I want to eat, or to be a snare for an enemy that's going to be attacking me. They used to have what were called ankle breakers. The Romans were very good at doing these in front of their army when they knew they were going to be attacked by another army. They were holes that were dug down about a little bit bigger around than a foot, and then camouflaged in such a way that when the charging army ran across them, some of them are going to stick their foot in there, and because the hole is about 3 feet deep, they're going to go into it far enough that their momentum is going to break their leg. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein. Guaranteed. You're going to dig some pits, you're going to pay a price. And that price is going to be rendered by God. Esther, verses 6 through 14, or rather 12 through 14. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate. But Haman hasted to his house mourning, and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with him, came the king's chamberlains, and hasted to bring Haman unto the banquet that Esther had prepared. Look at what's happened. Mordecai had not desired honors, but he was given extremely great honors. And note, these honors did not give Mordecai a swelled head. Now, how do I say that? Why would I say that? Because look what he did after he was led through the gate. Obviously, the crown was returned to the king, his robe was returned to him, the horse was returned to the stable, etc., etc. Nobody was now shouting in front of him, this is what's done to the king's man. He went right back to doing what he'd been doing before, sitting at the king's gate. Isn't that interesting? Kind of reminds me of someone else. Remember David, King David, became King David as the youngest son of his father's house, and because of that, his responsibility, as would be given to the lowest of the family, was to take care of the sheep, to be a sheep herder. That's the way things were done back in those days. As the children grew up, the firstborn had that responsibility until he got old enough, and then another maybe would take his place. And here David was the youngest. And you remember that the prophet had been told, David is going to be king. I want you to go to this man's house, and one of his sons are going to be the next king after Saul. And remember, the sons were paraded before him. And what happened? God told him, each time he thought, oh, this is the one. And each time God said, no, it's not him. So he'd go to this next born, and the next born. Finally, there aren't any more sons standing before him. Do you have any more children? Any more sons? Oh yeah, there's one. He's out tending the sheep. Too young to be here. Not old enough to have some of the responsibilities the others have. Although tending the sheep was a great responsibility. Well, bring him in here. And it is he whom God said, anoint him as the next king. Do you remember what David did? He went right back to tending the sheep. He didn't look at his brothers and say, hey, you ought to respect me now. And look at me, I'm going to be the next king. I'm going to be your king. I'm going to tell you what to do. He went right back to tending the sheep. How do I know that? Because as you study the context further, you find that his father had to call him out of the sheep to send supplies to the sons that were fighting in the army. Contrast Haman. He wants the honors that have been given to Mordecai. He wants to be king. I have no doubt about that in my mind, because he wouldn't have asked for those specific honors if he had not. He should have been satisfied with what he had, but he wasn't. He wanted more. He was second in command. The only honor that could be given to him greater than the one he already had was to be king. After giving honor to Mordecai, look at how Haman went slinking back to his house. Look at what it says. He went back to his house mourning, verse 12, and having his head covered. Why do you think he had his head covered? He was so humiliated because of what he had been forced to do. But to him, that would have been the greatest dishonor that he could have possibly done. And yet, remember something. When the king said, this is what I want you to do to Mordecai, who was it that was chosen to lead this person whom the king honored? An honored servant of the king. He mourned and covered his head. He was either mourning because he was beginning to understand what was in line for him, or maybe because he didn't want anybody to know who he was. But yet, would he not have been dressed in his nice apparel as he led Mordecai through the streets, and afterwards went to his house mourning and with his head covered? And look what happened after he got home. He told his wise men and wife all that had happened. Now remember how quickly these events are happening. The day before, he'd been honored by the king, and he goes home all happy and joyous, except he'd had to go past that old Mordecai, and Mordecai wouldn't give him the honor that he deserved, he thought he deserved. And he told his family, and they said, why don't you just build a gallows and go tomorrow morning and ask the king to put Mordecai to death on that gallows that you built. And so he goes. But instead of finding honor that he thought he deserved, it was given to Mordecai. And he goes home mourning because of what he had been forced to do by the king, and his head covered. And he told his family all that happened. Consider verse 14 carefully. He appears so troubled that he forgot the queen's invitation. The chamberlains had to come to the house and tell him, you need to come now. Hasted. See the word? Hasted. Consider how honored Haman should have been and could have very likely been. He had dined with the king and queen the day before. He was invited to the king and queens. Now, I understand there's something bad going to happen to him, and it's all because of himself. It's all because of his arrogance and his pride. And he was so blinded by hate that he failed to see the many honors that he already had. Who was to lead the king's honored one? Somebody who was honored himself. One of the king's most noble princes. And when a person is blinded by hate, he often fails to see the good things that are all around him. Just by pure blindness, we often, because we get so accustomed to things and so used to things, we fail to see them, don't we? The good roads that we have, the water that we have to drink out of a tap and don't have to worry about it poisoning us like a lot of people around the world. The good health that we have, even when we've got a cold, at least it's not pneumonia, right? When a person's blinded by hate, it becomes even more pronounced. It's not just an accident. Their hatred will cause them to be blind to the good things that are around them. Proverbs 29:10 says, the bloodthirsty hate the upright, but the just seek his soul. Look at that proverb just for a moment. There's a lot there. The bloodthirsty person, a person who is prone to hurt people, harm them, maybe even kill them. Who is it that he hates? The upright. Why? Because the upright person reminds him of what he really is. The upright person living a good life is somebody who, just by living the life that he's supposed to by God's standards, is a rebuke to those who are involved in sin, to those who are involved with hatred and they're bloodthirsty, seeking the harm of others. But the upright person is also someone who's going to seek the soul of that bloodthirsty one. See how God blends these concepts, and if we stop and we'll think about them, what he's saying? The upright person is a person who's going to want the best for other people, even that bloodthirsty person. What about us? How do we react toward people? Do we fail to see the blessings that are all around us, especially when something bad is happening to us by one of these people? Consider what the wise men and Haman's wife saw. They saw the handwriting on the wall. Haman may not have been able to see it. He should have been. Here's this old Jew. I want him dead. I want all the Jews dead. And then the king makes him honor him. He should have seen, uh-oh. This is trouble. If the king's going to honor this man, obviously the king will try and protect this man. And I want to kill him. The handwriting on the wall is clear to them. If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, be whom thou hast begun to fall, notice that, and shalt prevail against him, and shalt not prevail against him, but shall surely fall before him. How much clearer could it be? They saw it. They understood it. A lot like Rahab. Remember Rahab, she saw the handwriting on the wall at Jericho, didn't she? Oh, no, nothing was actually written on the wall. Well, how could she see the handwriting? Oh, she was told about the things that God had done for the Israelites as they wandered through the wilderness, as they had caused, or as he had caused the troops of Pharaoh to drown in the Red Sea. All of those things. She heard about it. She didn't see them. And because of that, she knew Jericho was going to fall. And so she asked for special favors, didn't she? Her life, her family's life. And she eventually became the great, if I remember correctly, the great-grandmother of King David. Isn't that interesting? How God can work? They knew Haman. His family knew. His advisors knew. You're doomed. God's hand's in this. Remember Romans 8 and verse 31? What shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us? It should have been very obvious to Haman. God's on Mordecai's side. You're doomed. It's over. Haman and his plot never had a chance. Never had a chance. Why? Because the Messiah had to come from some of those who were presently in the captivity of first Babylon and then for a short time Persia. So his people could not be wiped out. It never had a chance. No time now is given to him to think, what do I do? No time's given. The counselors of the king appear at the door and say, come on, let's go. So he has to go with haste. One writer stated that he was being led as a lamb to the slaughter, and so it was. He was so blinded by his hatred that he could not see what his advisors and his own family saw. You're finished, Haman. You want to kill the man and the lineage from which he came, whom the king desires to honor. And the king wasn't just Ahasuerus. It was God Almighty, Jehovah. That'll bring us to chapter 7 next week as we continue the study of this fabulous, full of information book.